Hi, I'm David Shipler.
I'm Daniel Zwerdling. Two reporters. Start now. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Danny. How you doing?
Great, thanks. And here's our mission today. We're going to find out, what is African American English and what is it not?
In our last two episodes, we talked with one of America's gurus in the field of what's commonly called standard American English, or some people call it mainstream American English.
It's the kind of English that the government uses and the law uses. It's the language most of us learn in schools. It's the language we're speaking right now. And as our guest in our last episodes described it, standard American English is basically the language that was developed by the people in power, which was mainly white people.
And of course, English is spoken in very different ways around the United States and around the country, around the world, actually, in English-speaking countries. There are serious linguistic differences. So today, we're going to ask the question, what is African American English? And our guest today wrote the book on the topic, literally. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you.
Lisa Green wrote African American English, A Linguistic Introduction. She runs the Center for the Study of African American Language at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst.
Welcome from me, too. So how do you define the language that so many African Americans speak? Most whites and people from other ethnic groups don't know how to speak it, or at least many. Some of them have trouble understanding it. So what is AAE and what is it not?
Yeah, well, African American English is a linguistic system, and it has a set sentence structure, a set semantics or meaning, set sound system. So you put all those pieces together and you get a linguistic variety.
It sounds like you're saying, in essence, this is a language with all its rules and complicated structures, just like any other language. It's not just, badly spoken English.
Right. It's not standard English or mainstream English with mistakes. You can call it a language or linguistic variety, but when it's referred to as a language, some people get really nervous because the view then is that we're trying to say that African American English is separate from, is a distinct language. And it's clear that it overlaps with general American English, standard English, and other varieties of English in certain ways. So I refer to it as a linguistic variety.
But it has its own structure and grammar, as you pointed out. So it in a way, I don't know, is it fair to call it a dialect? Would that be an appropriate word?
I also call it a dialect. Some people think that that's not the right way to conceive of it. But as a linguist, I don't really make a big distinction between dialects and languages because they're both systematic and they're both rule governed.
Do you have an idea of how many people speak African American English?
I mean, there have been some numbers published in the literature. I've seen 80%. I've seen most African Americans speak it. But then you have to think about African American English on a kind of continuum. There's speakers who grew up with it as their native variety, as I did, but there are also people who use it just in certain kinds of contexts. So it may very well be the case that many, many, many African Americans and non-African Americans know something about African American English.
So let's play an example of African American English, or at least this is what the movie makers in this film are portraying as African American English. Please tell us if they're accurate. This clip is from a Tyler Perry movie. He's a widely respected producer, actor, writer. He's African American. And the movie's called A Medea Homecoming. It came out last year.
The way that we're saying defund the police, there are criminals saying the same thing. That's why crime has gotten so much worse.
I don't know all the answers, but I know somebody needs to have some conversation, because you ain't gonna never get nothing figured out as long as everybody's screaming and yelling at each other and don't nobody listen.
My tax dollar, my tax dollar.
Joe, marry something, baby. When last time you paid a tax? You never pay no damn tax.
Can we just let this go, please? Well, do you want there to be lawlessness then?
Hey, babe, you think that scared me? Bring it.
Yeah, I mean, though Tyler Perry is spot on. I mean, the language is quite nice. It's definitely comical. And in some instances, there are exaggerations. But as the grammar, for the most part, yes, there is something, real about the language. Tyler Perry gets it right.
And something that was also, that struck me is that Tyler Perry seemed to be making a point about, here's one member of the family speaking very standard American English, and here's the other member of the family speaking AAE, and they're both at the same picnic table together.
That is right. That is right.
We should maybe say, Lisa Green, that by all accounts, you're one of the leaders in this field. When it came around 20 years ago, scholars called your book a landmark. They said it was the first textbook ever that examined the grammar of African-American English as a whole. And other scholars hailed you for doing seminal experimental work. So this is really an extremely researched and documented area of scholarship that you've done.
And we'll get into that scholarship in a moment. But first, I want to dive right into one of the biggest controversies surrounding African-American English, at least among white people. We were having dinner recently with some friends, and I told them that Dave and I were getting ready to do this chat with you about your research. And the wife said, and she's around my age, she's highly educated, she's white. The wife said, I know this probably sounds bad, and she seemed uncomfortable saying this. She said, but when I hear people speaking that way, like a lot of African Americans do, well, it just sounds to me like bad grammar. Mm-hmm. It just sounds like they're uneducated. Mm-hmm. So, Lisa, is that actually one of the reasons you went into this field, to research and demonstrate that that's not accurate?
That is not really the reason I went into the field, but it's certainly something that I think I can begin to address, or at least my work has implications for that kind of view. I don't address directly attitudes. I teach a course on African American English, and students take my course. And the goal in the course is not to get students to feel good about it, or to train their ears to feel okay if they hear something like that. It is just to show them that it's systematic. And if you think that it sounds uneducated, or the speaker sounds uneducated, or if it sounds like just trash, yes, indeed, I understand that, because African American English in some instances is really close to standard English. So you're probably hearing English, but you're not hearing it the way you're used to hearing it. So this sounds like bad English.
So if my friend were here right now saying, this sounds like bad English, what would you say to her directly?
What I would say is that here are some of the rules and patterns, and if you'd like to know more, please get my book. And you will understand that when you hear these speakers, it's not just bad English, it's really systematic. The other thing is that in some instances, people are not always reacting to the language, and that's just true. People are reacting to the people who are saying it.
That's right.
And so that's also another kind of attitude. But people, if I say something like, okay, well, between you and I, we're going to leave early. People don't really cringe when they hear that preposition.
I do.
I cringe.
You cringe. But certain people can say that, and it's not so problematic. But on the other hand, if you hear something like, oh, I'd be too tired, I cannot do that, that is a really marked feature. So it's not that people have problems with ungrammatical, non-standard use, but it depends on who's saying it. And it happens to be that African American English has a lot of marked features that really point you out.
You mean that point you out as a black person, probably?
Yes.
So what really inspired you to decide, I want to focus a lot of my career on researching African American English as a linguist?
I actually was working on my master's in English literature, and I read works by Zora Neale Hurston.
And let me interject. I'm disappointed to say that I haven't actually ever read Zora Neale Hurston, but I do know that she was a groundbreaking black writer in the early 1900s, right? And she wrote novels and short stories, and I think also poems about African-American lives, but her work didn't really get recognized until decades later.
And I found that she had an excellent ear, and I could really hear the speakers, and I could see how systematic and how authentic the speakers were, at least to me, from some given, that I grew up in Southwest Louisiana.
So when you read Zora Neale Hurston, a wonderful writer, you saw patterns of speech in her dialogue that you recognized from your own growing up in Louisiana?
Yes. So I wanted to look at that not from the literary standpoint, but from the standpoint of what kinds of rules are operating here.
Okay, and so that's what you wanted to study and then teach your students. Here are the rules. Here's the system of African American English.
That is right. The way, if you're taking a course in standard English, a grammar course, you have your textbooks, you have your handbooks, all written. That had not been done. And so that's really why I decided to do more work on African American English. Because when I went to research it, I found that there wasn't a whole lot on it.
So what are some of those rules that define African American English? Can you give us some examples?
All right. So African American English uses words that other varieties of English might also use. But there are also words that African American English uses, and those words sound like words in general American English, but they have different meanings. So kitchen is one word that may have different meanings in African American English, as well as the very common meaning, the room in the house where cooking takes place or that kind of thing. But kitchen can refer to hair at the nape of the neck for women.
Oh, really?
So that's a particular use.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah. Another word is sedity. That word is not used in other varieties of English, but it's a word that means conceited.
Oh, interesting.
Can you give us a demonstration with both of those words, maybe in the same, sentences?
Yes. Once the young lady had her kitchen processed or fixed, she was really sedity.
Wow.
I never heard sedity before.
For example, the word ben, B-E-E-N, occurs in all varieties of English, but it has different kinds of stress patterns or duration patterns. So in African American English, you can say something like, oh, I've been working so hard these days. But you could also say in African American English, oh, I've been working. So that kind of manipulation of the pattern then indicates now that the working started a long time ago, and it's continued up to the moment of utterance.
Yeah, you give another example which really appealed to me. The soup been gone. Now, that translated into standard English, I guess, would be the soup has been gone for a long time.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Someone ate it a long time ago. Yes.
Yeah.
Could you? Are you up for saying a few sentences in standard American English and then translate it into African American English?
Okay, I'll read a few. So these are just samples from my book. Okay, this is an exchange between two people. So the first person asked the question, "Y'all keep up with the news, huh?" So it's the question meaning, yes, indeed, you guys keep up with the news, don't you? The second person says, yeah, when it come on there, we beat and read it in the newspaper. So the second person answers and says, yes, when it shows on the television, on the news, we have generally already read it in the newspaper.
And the words are we B-E-D-E-N, D-E-N? We
beaten. But again, that's another difference in African American English. That use of done is generally unstressed. In other varieties, southern varieties, speakers might say, we done left. In African American English, it's we done left.
Does be done always mean we usually do?
No. Sometimes it can mean, it can have a kind of future completive meaning. Okay, so by November, they'll be done growed out of that. So by November, they will have grown out of that. So it has a number of different meanings.
And you have to know the context in order to know what the meaning is?
You definitely must know the context, yes.
Can you give us a couple of others before we go on?
Yeah, so here are some negation constructions, and I know you guys have heard of negative concord. I'll call it negative concord, but double negation is probably what you've heard.
Yes, my 8th grade teacher used to wield her 15-inch ruler on her desk when we did that. She was very, very dogmatic about no double negatives. Yeah.
You know what, though? I've been studying Spanish, and double negatives are a mainstay in Spanish. You don't say, I don't have any. You say, I don't have none.
Oh, thank you for that beautiful example.
In Russian, by the way, it can happen too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because if you don't have anything, you say "nichevo нет," meaning there is nothing, basically.
Yes, and so that's an interesting thing. Many languages are these kinds of negative concord languages, so you can stack negatives up. It doesn't get any more negative if you stack negatives up. It just says that wherever there can be a negative, I'm going to occur here just in agreement with my other negatives. So in African American English, someone said, can't nobody tell you it wasn't meant for you.
Oh boy, 3 negatives.
Yes. And what's interesting about that one is that you get inversion. So some speakers could also say, nobody can't tell you it wasn't meant for you. Good. So can't nobody tell you it wasn't meant for you, meaning that not a single person can tell you that it wasn't meant for you.
Because it was meant for you.
That is right. Yes.
And how did you do the research? I mean, did you travel around the country and make recordings of hundreds of people? Did you feed their words into a computer?
To Danny's question, how do you do it?
So I actually look at data produced by speakers in an area in Louisiana. And that's important to me because some of those areas are still, as you might know, segregated areas. And, that may be for another conversation. But one thing it actually means is that those communities are often more homogeneous than other communities. So there aren't many people coming in and out. So the variety used by those speakers is going to be a variety that is pretty much set. And so I have spent a good bit of time just collecting spontaneous speech from those members.
Wait, excuse me 1 second. When you say collecting, are you chatting with people in a coffee shop and recording it?
I generally don't do that unless I get permission, but I design experiments where I ask them to read just a small segment and then to produce the kind of sentence that they think might come naturally. So some of these are pretty much designed experiments, and sometimes it's just kind of spontaneous speech. Because you also want to be able to get speakers speaking naturally.
So I'm picturing you sitting there having these conversations and, scribbling in a notebook what people are saying. But in order to analyze and define the structure of African American English, you must have called on computers or something to help you show that an X% of the time been.
So I have definitely, listened, and I've recorded a number of constructions to see what the frequency might be. So in African American English, the claim is that there's no third person singular S. That's not part of the grammar. So when speakers say he run fast, then they will produce these verbs. Even if the subject is third person singular like he, they will produce the verbs without an overt S marker.
So it's the plural verb. I mean, by standard American English, that it's the plural.
Right. Yeah. But you can also do it with ED.
Aha. So instead of saying Mike washed the car yesterday, you'd say Mike wash the car yesterday.
Right. So it's important to count that because we do know that although you can leave off ED marking, past markings, you don't do it as much as you would with third person singular S. So the frequency counts are quite useful.
So again, your analyses prove that there are rules, structures that in African American English people use with regularity, just like we do with standard American English, and that this is not random.
That's right, and thank you for that too, because what we can show here, we can show not only that there are grammatical sentences in African American English, we can show that if we use something incorrectly, it is wrong. So in standard English, you might say, we're going to see if we can work out March. In African American English, we can also say, we're going to see if we can work out March. But in African American English, what you cannot do is have both if and can at the same time. You can't say, we're going to see if can we work out March. African American English says, you've got to have one at a time. So we can show that the sentences are grammatical, but we can show that if we disobey a particular rule, we get something that speakers of African American English would never produce.
Well, that raises the question of whether mistakes are made in, say, Hollywood movies or other mass media, maybe books, novels, where people are trying to represent African American English, but do it with all kinds of mistakes that you could certainly pick out and a lot of other people could as well.
Right.
Does that happen?
Yeah, that happens. I mean, and so for some, especially if you think in terms of Hollywood English, for some it's sufficient to sort of give the illusion that you're speaking African American English. So you may choose a feature and use it many times. So the B marker, I be too tired, that one can be overused and in some of the wrong contexts. I remember reading one book. I probably won't say the name of the book on here, but
Well, you can go ahead and do that.
oh, well, I mean, I remember there was a popular book, The Help.
All right, about the maids in the South.
Yes, and I could barely get through it.
And it was made into a hit movie with Viola Davis and Emma Stone.
Oh, Manny, I'm gonna give you a paid vacation. I ain't never had no paid vacation in my life. A week later, I come back, and they done moved to Mobile. And the lazy finger scared I found a new job before she moved. Ain't that right, Abeline? We got to get some more maids.
It's hard. You go try and see.
And I understood what the goal was, to sort of use a language that was, real, and that might have been used by one of the maids there. In some instances, I was okay, but in others, I just could not get with it.
The Help was written by a white woman.
Right. Yes.
So essentially, you suspect, you're being very kind, but you suspect, without being definitive, that the writer was writing what she thinks is African-American English, but it was like butchering Spanish, if you're not a Spanish
Yes, in
speaker.
some instances, and I can understand how someone could make mistakes, but mistakes they are.
So it sounds like it bugged you.
It did, because, it seems like, okay, I'm giving the illusion that African-American English is used, but they don't obey the rules. Now, maybe this is a variety of African-American English that I just didn't know. And it's true, there are variations of African-American English, but for me, there were many ungrammatical constructions. Yeah.
Let's step back for a minute and talk about the history of this language, because all languages come from complicated and deep backgrounds. Where does African American English come from? What are the roots, and how did it develop?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It just depends on the people you ask. One hypothesis about the origin of African American English, and a number of linguists have worked on this, but in particular, John Rickford, who's retired from Stanford. One of the claims here then is that African American English is a Creole, or it started off as a Creole.
Creole meaning, in this case, that African American English was a combination of a few different languages.
Yes. So there are Creoles like Gullah, which is spoken in the coastal Carolinas, near Georgia and parts of Florida. So the claim is that, if you're thinking of plantations and where there are Africans who may speak different languages, these Africans may come together and strike up a kind of method of communicating, which isn't a full language. For some, that might be called a pidgin. And then, though, that pidgin may get more and more structures, and then children may grow up speaking the pidgin, not the African languages, as their native language. The claim is that when there are many more speakers, the language will become more complex. This is now moving from pidginhood to Creolehood. And so this Gullah is a Creole that basically has some African structures and vocabularies. And the Creolists think that African American English may have started in this way. That's one view.
And I suppose the slaves would have learned the English from the foremen who, were probably not very well educated.
And that's yet another view that says, on some plantations, the slaves may have had much more contact with whites. And for those slaves, then the environment might have been right for them to learn a kind of imperfect second language, so to speak. But they would still have some influence from, African languages, Creoles, that kind of thing. That's another view.
So they were really creating a lingua franca to communicate with each other, one another, by, as you said, many different African languages were represented on the plantations among enslaved people. So they were creating a whole different means of communication, which they kind of developed and understood among themselves then.
Right.
And don't some people,
and then another view. Oh, what were you going to say something, Dan?
and don't some linguists argue, or other academics argue, that in fact African American English is more closely derived to English from Britain in ancient times?
Absolutely. And the claim there would be that you don't have to appeal to Creoles or African languages, but All you need to know is that African American English, for one reason or the other, has retained some of these older features, like this negative concord, which was very much part of the language.
And while we're talking about the idea that maybe African American English had its origins in Old English, I was reading a fascinating article about ask versus X. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the words that a lot of whites get bothered by is when they hear African Americans say X instead of ask. And of course, the chairman of the January 6th committee, which investigated the Trump fomented attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021.
Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order.
The committee chairman at the time was Benny Thompson. He's African American. He's from Mississippi. He's highly respected as a congressman. And he kept using the word AKS, A-K-S.
We asked them what they hoped to see the committee accomplish. Officer Fanon asked us to look into the actions and activities that resulted.
And I've heard white people say, why can't African Americans say the word ask properly?
Why can't George Bush say nuclear instead of nuclear?
Today, Iraq continues to withhold important information about its nuclear program. Iraq employs capable nuclear scientists. It retains physical infrastructure needed to build a nuclear weapon.
That really bugged me, I'll tell you.
So this article, and I'm sorry I've lost the author's name here, said that the form AKS, A-K-S, has origins in Old English.
It's true.
And German over a millennium ago. Can you talk about that for a moment, please?
Yeah, that is indeed the case. I guess that process, I don't study it, but it's called like metathesis. So you get the change in the two particular sounds, the k sound and the s sound. That is pretty much something that we find in linguistic texts that talk about Old English. But still, people are not really soothed by that kind of argument. They will say things like, okay, I admit that this was used, but still, why can't the speakers use what we're using today?
But again, the point here is that the word AKS, A-K-S, when an African American says it, this is part of a system.
Absolutely.
Of speaking with its own rules and grammar, just like any other dialect.
Absolutely. Just like the word, test. Speakers will say test as opposed to test.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I hadn't heard that, actually. Yeah.
A lot of final consonants dropped.
Right. In certain contexts, yeah.
My impression, doing some reading to prepare for our chat with you today, is that African-American scholars started talking about the origins of African-American English and what does African-American English mean many, 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 many years ago, but that it really became part of a national conversation in the 1960s.
That is right. I think during the period of integration, there were speakers, obviously, of maybe African-American English who were going to schools where there weren't many teachers who were familiar with that variety. And the stories I hear, I started school in 1969, but I hear many people who were my professors or researchers, they say, when I went to school, I was placed immediately in special education classes.
Oh, boy.
Because the way I spoke, I had to see speech pathologists.
Speech pathologists? You mean because the white teachers and administrators said, if this child is talking...
It may have been a disorder. The claim was that these people are speaking, but they are really speaking as if they don't have any culture. They're culturally deficient. We need to have something happen here. They can't talk. And so some linguists really started then to try to show that this particular variety was indeed logical and systematic. So you're right. That's when it really got off the ground during that period.
There was litigation over this. There was a 1979 court.
Yeah, so that case was a court case in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yeah, this was the Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School children versus the Ann Arbor School District Board.
Right. As it turned out, children from a certain housing area were going to a school in Ann Arbor, and many children from that area were being placed in special education courses. And so there was a complaint brought against the school system. And the claim was that the children were being placed in those education classes, but they were not learning to read. They were not being academically successful. And so the ruling then was that it wasn't that they spoke this variety. that was the barrier. The barrier was actually that teachers were not taking into consideration that they were speaking something that was not offered in the classroom. Then teachers were ordered, as I understand it, to take professional development courses that would help them understand what was happening with the variety a bit more. We don't have evidence that that ever happened, but that was indeed a court case. We saw it come around again. You move from 1979 and then you wake up, it's 1996, and you see a quite similar court case. The Oakland Unified School System had something similar.
In Oakland, California.
Oakland, California. I mean, why would we need to discuss this issue that we should have worked out in 1979? So
we never resolve any issues, do we?
That's
And as I recall, in Oakland, the school board passed a resolution, is this right, Lisa, that saying that the schools had to recognize African American English as a valid language,
right,
and the children should be able to get instruction in it and do their work.
Which they called Ebonics back then, right?
They did. They called it Ebonics, indeed. That's right. And that caused a number of problems, having this variety recognized in school, because now all of a sudden people were saying, oh no, I don't want children to be taught in this. I don't want them to speak like that.
And it was really interesting that some African American civil rights leaders like Jesse Jackson, one of the most famous leaders in our modern times, denounced the Oakland resolution.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
He said at the time, quote, "I understand the attempt to reach out to these children, but this is an unacceptable surrender borderlining on disgrace."
Yeah.
Later, he tempered that view many years later. But I think what he was saying, in essence, was, I want African-American children to learn the same English as everybody else knows.
Well, if we really think about it, there aren't that many people around the world who are trained to teach African-American English. So they were never going to teach African-American English, but they wanted to be familiar with the linguistic system. And the approach they took was that, and many schools take this approach if they do anything at all. They say, well, we love your African-American English, but when you're in the classroom, then what you need to do is speak the way you should speak in formal kinds of settings.
Is that what you were told, Lisa, when you went to school? In school, you have to speak, quote, standard English?
We were told that, yes, but how do you know what is like?
How do you know what that is, right?
I'm not trying to do the bad thing here. I'm not going to school and I'm not, just disobeying you. And I could hear some language and I was able to figure out early on that, wow, I use B, but these people in my school don't use B. It's not always easy to kind of switch. People don't understand that. African American English and General English are really very close, but it's not really easy for all speakers to just kind of shift if they wanted to.
Lisa, I would love to hear your personal view. If you could be the czar of the educational system in the United States, what would you like to see schools do? How would you like them to handle African American English, both among the students and the teachers?
What do you think should be happening now?
The one thing I'd like to see is teachers get a clear understanding of how African American English works and to use that particular knowledge in their teaching. My view is that won't wipe out negative attitudes, but for those teachers who might have negative attitudes about this particular linguistic variety, at least they'll know that it's based on different kinds of rules. And if students are speaking it, then at least they're going to have some tools to help the child use other things.
But I know that you feel deeply, because you've written about this, that still many African American children are dissed in schools because the white teachers think that these black children are speaking inferior English. And you talked about that earlier in our chat. But I've read that you still feel this is an important issue in many schools.
So there are a number of cases, and I've seen people do this kind of research. They go into like Head Start programs, early childhood programs, and collect data from children who are 3, 4, 5 years old. And they may do programs that are designed to teach these children standard English. So if a child uses something like he run, they immediately correct them. So I am totally against something like that because children at that particular age are still developing their variety. And I think it's socially unjust to do that to a child. So at 4 years, let's go in the school system, have these books, make sure children know that they should be using runs instead of he run. That is not a good approach. That approach is out for me.
Well, why not, Lisa? I mean, I've just to be the gadfly for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's the strangest thing I've ever heard. If children are still developing and getting things just right, how then could someone sort of step in just at the point when they're developing and doing things that all children are doing, and no matter what language they use that for? You know, a mother might correct the child, but understand that the child is going to work it out later.
What do you think what do you think the impact is on a child who gets that kind of reprimand?
We do know what happens when children are consistently corrected.
What happens in that case?
So there are a number of examples. So there's in African American English, for the cluster STR, it can be produced SKR. So some speakers can say screet
instead of street.
It's not a speech defect. Some people can say strawberry.
Instead of strawberry.
Yeah. So one little child was reading a book, and there was a street, and it was, Orange Street or something. So the child would reading really nicely, but when the child got to that, Maxie lived on Orange Street. Every time the child said that, the teacher stopped and said, street, you're doing it again. And the child would just like, what's happening? And then at the very end, the child decided that, no, I don't want to read anymore.
Yeah.
So that is probably part of what will happen. You get children silent and they're not talking. And now it's third grade, fourth grade, they've checked out. So that, I think, is one effect.
But what is the best way to approach that? I mean, assuming for the moment that the final goal is to get the child to pronounce the words according to standard English or the way they're written. I mean, how do you get around the problem of you don't want to inhibit the child, obviously. You don't want to make the kid feel horrible about being in school. Don't want to discourage the child from reading. So what is the best approach, would you say?
Are you basically advocating that African-American kids who speak African-American English should be able to go through the school systems with teachers and administrators respecting their form of speech and even, grading papers acknowledging this is thoughtful speech with its own rules and grammars, and at the same time teaching standard American English too?
That would be good. I think children should have access to all that schools have to offer. I think it should be understood that children are coming to school with systematic varieties. So if teachers really don't know anything about the linguistic variety, it may be difficult to really point students in a direction where they can get further help. So I think teachers should know something about African American English, other varieties. They should respect the child's variety, but respect doesn't mean that they never offer the child any instruction about standard English. But they should respect, meaning they should understand that children are not coming to school without a language.
But do you think that should African American kids also have to learn standard American English and, pass all the tests and et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I mean, I don't see how there aren't going to be any tests written in African American English. And if we waited until people could do that, we'd be waiting for quite some time. And I don't think any speakers of African American English will have problems learning standard English. Many of them go to school with some ability to code shift, style shift. So that's already in place. They understand. I mean, look, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote about this a long, long time ago, double consciousness. So people already understand that, but we need teachers to understand what it means for someone to come to school with a linguistic system. Yes. And
finally, before you go, I promised my wife I would ask you this.
Okay, great.
She was really upset at the idea that two old white guys, meaning David K. Shipler and me, would even be having this conversation. Do you? What's your view?
I have the conversation with people who are interested in African American English, because it's a native variety. Now, if you wanted to talk to me about, well, there's something about Black people, they are exuberant. They love to dance, so the language has to be musical and exuberant. I don't want to talk about that. But it seems that you are genuinely interested or you have genuine questions about African American English as a system, then I will talk to you.
Oh, that's a great distinction, actually. Yeah. Because it's so easy to slide into stereotypes and caricatures. I think this is just absolutely fascinating. Lisa, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Lisa Green for the University of Massachusetts.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
And that's it for this episode of Two Reporters.
You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, or pretty much any leading podcast site. And we hope you'll check out more of our work at tworeporters.org. I'm David Tripler.
And I'm Daniel Zwerdling. Please join us again soon for another episode of Two Reporters. Bye-bye.